It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, or so it seemed. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her small, cozy house with Max, her golden retriever guide dog, leading the way. The cool breeze brushed against her face, and the sounds of birds chirping filled the air. For Sarah, the world was a place she couldn't see but had learned to navigate with the help of Max. He wasn't just her guide, he was her protector, her best friend, and her eyes. In the small town where she lived, people often noticed Sarah. She was known as the blind lady with the golden retriever. Most folks were kind, offering a smile or a warm hello as she passed. But there were always a few who didn't understand her life, who saw her as someone weak or in need of pity. Sarah didn't let it bother her. She was used to being underestimated. What they didn't know was that Sarah and Max had faced more challenges than most people could imagine. Max wasn't your average guide dog. He had been trained by experts to do more than just lead Sarah safely across streets or through crowded sidewalks. Before he became Sarah's companion, Max had worked with law enforcement. He had a sharp nose that could sniff out danger and a keen sense of when something wasn't right. Max was a tracker dog, skilled at finding people who didn't want to be found. But now, his job was simpler, or so they both thought. As they walked down the quiet street, Sarah held Max's harness with one hand and her cane with the other. She moved with confidence, trusting Max to guide her safely. They followed the familiar path to the park, where Sarah liked to sit and listen to the sounds of children playing, leaves rustling, and the occasional bark of a dog. "Good boy, Max," Sarah said with a smile, patting his head. Max wagged his tail, his soft fur brushing against her leg. He was always alert, his ears perked up, scanning for any signs of trouble. To Sarah, Max was more than a dog, he was her partner. They had a bond so strong that sometimes it felt like they could understand each other without words. The town seemed peaceful that morning, but Sarah had learned long ago that looks could be deceiving. Life wasn't always predictable. She had faced moments of fear and uncertainty before, but with Max by her side, she felt strong. Together, they had overcome obstacles that might have stopped others in their tracks. Sarah was content to live a quiet life. She didn't seek attention or excitement. Most days, she enjoyed her routine, her morning walks with Max, her time spent reading Braille books, and the occasional coffee shop visit where she loved the smell of freshly brewed coffee. But as they continued their walk that Tuesday morning, something felt different. Max's pace slowed slightly, and his ears twitched. Sarah could feel the shift in his movements through the harness. He was paying attention to something, though she didn't know what. "What is it, Max?" she asked, her voice calm but curious. Max didn't bark or growl, he just kept walking, his body tense, his steps deliberate. To most people, Sarah's life seemed ordinary, even predictable. But she knew that ordinary days could change in an instant. Over the years, she had learned to trust her instincts and Max's too. If Max was on alert, there was a reason. She couldn't see the world around her, but she had learned to listen, to feel, to trust her senses. And right now, her guide dog was telling her that something was different. As they neared the park, the sounds of the town grew louder. Cars drove by, a few children laughed, and someone was mowing their lawn in the distance. Everything seemed normal, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the day held something unexpected. Max's behavior wasn't alarming, but it was enough to put her on edge. Sarah paused near the entrance to the park and knelt beside Max. She ran her hand along his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. "You're okay, boy," she said softly. "We're okay." Max licked her hand and wagged his tail lightly, as if trying to reassure her. Still, his ears remained perked, his body alert. As they continued into the park, Sarah thought about how much she had come to depend on Max. He wasn't just her guide dog, he was her teammate, her guardian, her hero. Max had saved her life more than once, and though she didn't like to think about those moments, she was always grateful for his courage and training. To anyone else, Sarah and Max looked like a normal pair, a blind woman and her loyal guide dog enjoying a morning walk. But there was so much more to their story. And on that ordinary Tuesday morning, as they walked further into the park, neither of them knew that their peaceful routine was about to take a dark and unexpected turn. Max's ears twitched again, and he stopped walking. Sarah felt his sudden halt and tightened her grip on the harness. "What is it, Max?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The golden retriever stood still, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She trusted Max completely, and she knew better than to ignore his instincts. "Let's keep moving," she said, her voice steady but firm. Max obeyed, but he moved with caution, his nose low to the ground, sniffing the air. Sarah couldn't see what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: Max was trying to protect her. And whatever it was he sensed, she would face it together with him. The trouble began when Sarah and Max walked past the alley near the local coffee shop. It was a spot Sarah passed almost every day on her morning walks. Usually, the alley was quiet, with only the faint smell of coffee and pastries drifting through the air. But today, it was different. Loud laughter echoed from the alley, followed by the rumble of motorcycle engines. Sarah slowed down, her grip on Max's harness tightening slightly. She didn't like loud noises or unexpected crowds, but she trusted Max to guide her safely through. As they approached the group of bikers, Sarah felt Max's body stiffen beside her. He had been calm a moment ago, but now he was tense, his every muscle on alert. Sarah had learned to read his signals, and she knew this meant trouble. "Hey, lady," one of the bikers called out. His voice was sharp and mocking, cutting through the morning air like a knife. "Watch where you're going." Sarah's cane had accidentally tapped against the tire of a parked motorcycle as she walked by. She paused, unsure of what to say. Max let out a low growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Sarah nervous. Max didn't growl often, and when he did, it was always for a reason. The bikers noticed Max's reaction and started to laugh. "What's the matter, boy?" another one taunted. "You don't like motorcycles?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm sorry," she said politely, her voice steady. "I didn't mean to touch your bike." "Sorry," one of them repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Well, sorry doesn't fix a scratch, does it?" Sarah's heart started to race. She couldn't see their faces, but she could hear the hostility in their voices. She had been in situations like this before, times when people mistook her blindness for weakness. But Sarah wasn't weak, and she wasn't alone. Max growled again, louder this time. His body leaned slightly forward, as if he were ready to defend her. "Relax, princess," another biker said, his voice full of mockery. "What's your dog gonna do? Lick us to death?" The group erupted into laughter, but Sarah didn't laugh. She could feel the tension in the air, and she knew this was more than just harmless teasing. She tightened her grip on Max's harness, her fingers pressing into the worn leather. Her face remained calm, but her mind was racing. Max was no ordinary dog. He had been trained by one of the most elite canine units in the country. Before becoming Sarah's guide, Max had worked with police officers to track criminals and protect lives. He was smart, strong, and incredibly loyal. The bikers had no idea who they were messing with. One of the men stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. Sarah could hear his movements, and she could feel Max's reaction. The dog's growl deepened, his body vibrating with tension. "Look, lady," the biker said, his tone now lower and more menacing, "why don't you just turn around and go back the way you came? You're not welcome here." Sarah stood her ground. She wasn't about to let them scare her off. I'm just passing through, she said firmly. I don't want any trouble. Too late for that, the biker muttered. Max let out a sharp bark, startling the group. For a moment, the alley was silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Whoa, easy there, one of the bikers exclaimed, backing up a step. That mutt's got a temper. He's not a mutt, Sarah said calmly, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. And he doesn't like bullies. The bikers exchanged glances, their laughter fading. They hadn't expected her to talk back. What did you say? One of them asked, his tone dangerous. You heard me, Sarah replied, her grip on Max's harness unyielding. She didn't need to see their faces to know they were angry. She could feel it in the way their voices sharpened, in the uneasy shuffle of their feet. Max barked again, this time louder and more commanding. He wasn't playing around, and neither was Sarah. One of the bikers cursed under his breath. She's not worth it, he muttered, turning away. Let's go. But another one wasn't so quick to back down. What's your deal, lady? He asked, stepping closer again. You think you're tough just because you've got a big dog? Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have to. Max was already doing the talking for her. The golden retriever stood tall, his eyes locked on the biker who was now just a few feet away. Max's growls were steady and low, a warning that even someone without training could understand. You'd better listen to your friend, Sarah said finally. Walk away. For a moment, it seemed like the biker might push his luck. But then he looked at Max, really looked at him, and seemed to think better of it. Fine, he spat. Whatever. Let's go, guys. The group climbed onto their motorcycles, revving their engines loudly as they prepared to leave. Sarah stood still, waiting until the roar of their bikes faded into the distance. When the alley was quiet again, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She knelt down beside Max, her hands shaking slightly as she stroked his fur. Good boy, Max, she whispered. Good boy. Max wagged his tail gently, his body relaxing as the tension in the air disappeared. Sarah stood up, her heart still pounding. She didn't know why the bikers had been there or what they had planned, but she knew one thing for sure, Max had protected her, just like he always did. As they continued their walk, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: fear, relief, and gratitude. She knew the world wasn't always kind, but she also knew she could face it with Max by her side. And even though the bikers thought they were tough, Sarah smiled to herself. They had no idea just how tough her ordinary guide dog really was. The bikers didn't back off. Instead, one of them stepped closer. His boots crunched loudly on the gravel, the sound sharp in Sarah's ears. You lost or something? He asked with a sneer. His voice was full of mockery, as if he found the entire situation amusing. Sarah tightened her grip on Max's harness. Max's growl grew deeper, a low rumble that made the air feel heavy. His ears were pinned back, and Sarah could feel the tension in his body through the harness. He was alert, ready to act if he had to. Max, easy, Sarah murmured, her voice soft but firm. She placed her free hand on his back, hoping to calm him down. But her tone carried a subtle warning, not just to Max but to the bikers as well. She wanted them to know she wasn't afraid, even if her heart was racing. She took a step to the side, trying to move around the group, but Max wouldn't let her. He suddenly stopped, pulling her to a halt. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, his whole body tense. What is it, boy? Sarah whispered, her brow furrowing. Max only acted like this when he sensed something or someone dangerous. Max jerked his head sharply toward one of the bikers. His growl grew louder, and his stance became firm, as if he was ready to protect Sarah at any moment. The biker noticed Max's reaction and scowled. What's his problem? he snapped, his voice louder now, more defensive. Sarah tilted her head slightly, her calm expression masking the worry that was creeping into her thoughts. She didn't answer right away, letting the silence hang in the air. Finally, she said, "Max never has a problem. He's just observant." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She knew Max's instincts were rarely wrong. If he thought something was off, there was a reason. The biker shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the others. "Observant, huh? Well, he'd better keep his nose to himself," he muttered, trying to sound tough. But Sarah could hear the slight tremor in his voice. Max barked sharply, the sound startling everyone. The biker took a step back, his bravado faltering. "What's with this dog?" he said, his tone a mix of irritation and unease. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She crouched down beside Max, running her hand gently over his back. "What do you smell, Max?" she asked softly, as if he could answer her. Max didn't move his gaze from the biker. His growls continued, steady and low, a warning that even someone without any understanding of dogs could recognize. The other bikers exchanged glances. One of them chuckled nervously. "Come on, man, it's just a dog. Let's go." But the first biker, the one Max was focused on, didn't move. He stood frozen, his arms crossed, trying to look unfazed. "Yeah, just a dog," he muttered, though his voice lacked confidence. Sarah straightened up, still holding tightly to Max's harness. "Max doesn't growl like this for no reason," she said calmly. "He's trained to pick up on things most people miss." "What's that supposed to mean?" the biker snapped, his tone defensive. "It means he knows when someone isn't being honest," Sarah said evenly. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The biker's face twisted into a sneer. "You think your mutt knows something about me?" he spat. "I don't think," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I know. And so does Max." The other bikers shifted uneasily. "Come on, man, let's just leave her alone," one of them muttered. But the first biker wasn't ready to back down. "You're just bluffing," he said, stepping closer again. "You can't even see me. What do you know?" Sarah's grip on Max's harness tightened even more. "I know enough," she said. "And Max knows the rest." Max barked again, the sound loud and sharp. This time, the biker stumbled back a step, startled by the intensity of the dog's reaction. "You're crazy," he muttered, turning to his friends. "She's just some blind lady with a dog." "Maybe," Sarah said, her tone calm but firm. "Or maybe I'm more than that. Maybe Max is more than that too." Her words seemed to hit a nerve. The biker hesitated, glancing at his friends for support. But they were already inching away, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Let's go," one of them urged. "She's not worth it." The first biker hesitated, then let out a frustrated huff. "Fine," he muttered. "But keep that dog away from me." Sarah didn't respond. She simply stood there, her posture straight and unwavering, as the group of bikers finally backed off. When they were gone, Sarah knelt down beside Max again. She stroked his fur, her hands trembling slightly. "Good boy, Max," she whispered. "Good boy." Max wagged his tail gently, his body relaxing now that the tension had passed. But Sarah's mind was racing. What had Max sensed about that biker? And why had he reacted so strongly? She didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear, Max had protected her, just like he always did. Whatever danger might have been lurking, Max had faced it head on. As Sarah stood up and continued her walk, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Max's instincts were rarely wrong, and she trusted him completely. Whatever was going on, She knew one thing for sure: she and Max would face it together. Max lunged forward suddenly, pulling Sarah slightly with him. His nose was aimed directly at the boots of the biker who had been the loudest and most taunting. The sudden movement startled everyone, especially the man in Max's sights. The biker stumbled back, his confidence visibly shaken. "Hey! Get your mutt under control," the man shouted, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying his fear. Sarah felt Max's energy through the harness. He was tense, focused, and unrelenting. She crouched down beside him, her hand gently resting on his neck. She could feel the strength in his muscles, the way he was holding himself ready, like a coiled spring. "It's funny," Sarah said softly, her tone calm but carrying a subtle edge. "Max doesn't usually act like this unless there's a reason." She tilted her head slightly, her face unreadable. "He only reacts this way around people who've been involved in things they shouldn't." The biker's face turned pale. His tough guy act was crumbling, his bravado slipping like a mask that no longer fit. He took another step back, his boots crunching on the gravel. One of the other bikers tried to step in, his voice louder now to cover his own discomfort. "Kman, she's bluffing. What's a blind lady and her mutt gonna do?" He laughed nervously, but the sound didn't have the confidence he wanted it to. Sarah stood up slowly, her posture straight and commanding. Her grip on Max's harness was firm, steady. "Max doesn't bluff," she said evenly. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. "He's a retired police canine, trained to track criminals." And judging by his reaction, she let her voice trail off for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. Then she finished, "It seems like someone here might have a past they'd rather keep hidden." The group froze. The laughter and mocking smiles disappeared in an instant. Max barked sharply, the sound slicing through the tension like a blade. His gaze was locked on the man's boots, unwavering and intense. The biker tried to recover, but it was clear he was rattled. "This is stupid," he muttered, glancing at his friends for support. "It's just a dog." But one of the other bikers was already backing away, his expression uneasy. "I don't know, man," he said. "Dogs like that, they don't make mistakes." Max didn't move. His body was still, his growl low and steady. It was as if he was daring the man to make a move. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. "Let's get out of here," one of the bikers muttered, his voice shaking. He grabbed his helmet from his bike and climbed on, eager to leave. But the man Max was focused on didn't move. He looked frozen, caught between fear and denial. "This is ridiculous," he said again, though his voice lacked conviction. Sarah stepped closer, her calm voice cutting through the noise. "Max knows things most people don't," she said. "He's trained to pick up on sense, on body language, on fear. If he's reacting like this, it's not a mistake." The man took another step back, his hands raised defensively. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Your dog's just crazy." Max barked again, louder this time. The sound made the other bikers flinch. It was clear that Max wasn't going to back down. "Crazy?" Sarah said, her voice steady. "No, Max isn't crazy. He's a professional. And if I were you, I'd think very carefully about why he's acting this way." The man's face was now a shade paler, and he was visibly sweating. He looked at his friends, but none of them seemed willing to help him. One by one, the bikers started to leave, muttering excuses as they climbed onto their motorcycles. Finally, the man was alone with Sarah and Max. He looked around, realizing he had no support left. "Fine," he snapped, his voice loud but shaky. "I'll go." He turned to leave, but Max barked again, stopping him in his tracks. Sarah didn't move, her hand still resting on Max's harness. "Whatever it is you've done, she said softly, "you might want to think about making it right." "Max doesn't forget, and neither do I." The man didn't respond. He hurried toward his bike, fumbling with the helmet as he climbed on. The engine roared to life, and within seconds, he was gone, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Sarah let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time. She crouched down beside Max, running her hand along his back. "Good boy, Max," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. Max wagged his tail lightly, his growl fading. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes calm and steady now, as if to say, "We did it." Sarah stood up, her hand still on Max's harness. She couldn't see the empty alley behind her, but she could feel the tension lifting, like a storm that had passed. As they walked away, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and curiosity. She didn't know what Max had sensed about that man, but she trusted him completely. Max's instincts were never wrong, and today, they had protected her once again. Whatever secrets the biker had been hiding, Sarah knew one thing: with Max by her side, she would always be safe. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The familiar wail brought a sense of relief to Sarah, though she kept her composure. Her fingers brushed Max's fur as she stood by his side, feeling his steady presence. She had already pressed the silent emergency alert on her phone, a feature she always carried in case of danger. The bikers who had remained looked uneasy, their tough expressions faltering. They glanced at each other, unsure of what to do now. Max stayed calm but watchful, his intense gaze still locked on the man he had singled out earlier. When the police cars pulled up, their lights flashing brightly even though Sarah couldn't see them, the officers quickly stepped out. One of them, Officer Daniels, approached Sarah, his footsteps confident and familiar. "Ms. Mitchell," he greeted her. "We got your alert. What's going on?" Sarah tilted her head toward the biker Max had been focused on. Her voice was steady, calm, and full of quiet authority. "Max seems to think this man might have something worth investigating," she explained. "You might want to start with the smell on his boots." The biker laughed nervously, trying to act casual. "This is ridiculous," he said, holding up his hands. "I didn't do anything. She's just a blind lady with a dog who doesn't like me." But Sarah stood firm, her grip on Max's harness steady. "Max doesn't make mistakes," she said simply. Officer Daniels crouched down, studying Max's body language. He had worked with canine units before and recognized the signs of a trained tracker at work. Max's posture, his unwavering focus, and the low growl in his throat all pointed to one thing: the dog had found something important. "All right," Daniels said, standing up. "Let's take a look." The officer motioned for another policeman to join him. Together, they approached the biker, who immediately began to protest. "You can't just search me," he yelled, his voice shaky. "I have rights." "Calm down," Daniels replied. "If you've got nothing to hide, this won't take long." Max barked once, as if to emphasize the officer's point. The biker flinched, his tough demeanor crumbling further. As the officers began their search, they checked the man's boots first, just as Sarah had suggested. It didn't take long for them to find what they were looking for. Inside one of the boots was a small, tightly wrapped bag. Daniels opened it carefully, revealing its contents: a stash of stolen jewelry that matched the descriptions from recent robbery reports in the area. Well, Daniels said, holding up the bag. "Looks like we've got a match." The biker's face turned pale. I don't know how that got there," he stammered. "It's not mine." "Save it," another officer said, shaking his head. "We've heard that one before." As the search continued, more evidence was found: tools commonly used for breaking and entering, as well as other small items reported missing from local homes. It was clear this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Max sat calmly by Sarah's side, his job done. His earlier tension had melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence. He watched as the man was handcuffed, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Looks like your mutt isn't so ordinary after all," one of the officers joked, glancing at Sarah with a grin. Sarah smiled faintly, her hand resting gently on Max's back. "He never was," she said softly. The officers finished their work, taking statements and gathering evidence. They spoke to Sarah with respect, clearly impressed by her calm demeanor and Max's incredible instincts. "We'll take it from here," Daniels assured her. "Thanks to you and Max, we might have just solved more than one case today." Sarah nodded, feeling a quiet pride. She didn't need recognition or praise, just knowing that Max's training had made a difference was enough.